Now some of that hard, depressing stuff. And we can handle that, right? Okay, all right. So again, now I'm going to go through a lot of stuff here where I want to talk about the model and I want to bring you into the logic of multi-site. But first, that word multi-site does not really mean a lot to many of us, right? So before I go into the logic of multi-site, I also want to just very briefly explain what it is. Now, I'm doing a workshop after this where I will go into more depth and detail about what multi-site is and the different models, but I'm not going to do that today because, again, we're focusing on the logic behind it. So we're all on the same page. I just want to get us a little bit, sort of do a Cliff Notes version of what it is. And the way that we're thinking about it in congregational life is first and foremost to understand what a multi-site model of congregational connection is you need to understand that multi-site is a type of network. Now, in congregational life, we've started just because one of our main missions, one of our main goals as staff is interconnection, is pulling all of our congregations into deeper connections. You've heard a lot of talk about clusters, I think, this weekend. That's one of the ways that the staff are trying to connect congregations more deeply. But we've created this typology of different kinds of networking, different levels of architecture of interdependence. And so I want to highlight these four so we can place multi-site on where they are in this typology. So the first one, when we talk about learning networks or learning webs, these are things that we all are familiar with, right? We're doing it right now. These are webs of connection where we share learning together, where congregations come together and share learning. That's that first one. The thing I want to highlight about that is it's also webs that come together temporarily. Now, we don't notice this, but the multi-site logic, or people who are doing multi-site, really put an emphasis on this first level of networking is about shared learning, but temporarily coming together to do it. The next level of networking is also what we're all familiar with, what we're calling doing networks, and that's where we temporarily get together to share activity. Think coming together to do joint social justice efforts, coming together temporarily to march and witness at the gay pride parades, coming together temporarily to do youth groups. But there's this huge chasm here, where what we're noticing is there are other kind of networks that pull congregations together not temporarily to do learning and work, but to come together in permanent connections. So sharing networks are the word we're giving to congregations that share programming or staff in a more permanent way. So this, and then the being networks are where congregations actually come together and merge and actually share mission and all their work, and in a sense are one congregation in many locations. And so when you understand these four, this is where multi-site is on the map. And the key thing to remember there is that it's a different kind of thing than what we're normally used to. When we talk about congregational interdependence, without thinking about it, almost like that frog, or a fish in water that doesn't realize it. We talk mostly about learning networks and doing networks, which are temporary, but we don't highlight that piece. Multi-site networks and multi-site logic is pushing us to notice that most of our congregational interconnection is temporary, not permanent. Now, that becomes significant because what I want to argue is that even though some of this, that we don't notice this, that what's behind this is no small thing to push us to be permanent, because it's out of permanence that actually new resources and hope are rising out of permanent relationships. That's the claim, rather than temporary ones. I'll come back to that in a second and a little more. So this is one way of thinking about multi-site. The second thing is, in terms of what is multi-site, multi-site is many UU models. Can everyone see this map? Okay. So the cool thing, right? I was starting multi-site work about 8 years ago, and I've been studying it for about 12 years. And up until about 4 years ago, the only congregations, multi-site congregations you could go to study or work with or go to visit were mostly evangelical congregations. And now, in our own movement, in the Unitarian Universalist movement, in the past 4 years only, we've gone from about 4 multi-site congregational relationships to almost 20 existing and emerging. Well, that's huge when you think about it. It's a huge trajectory going on. And I would argue that something's happening, right? That's part of my point of this. It's not just to be grateful that now we can go to our own system to learn, but something's going on in the psyche and the spirit of our congregations that's wanting us to explore a new way of being together. And then the other piece is just that multi-site is many models. Again, I don't want to go into this too much today, or too much this morning. I'll go into it in my workshop. But again, the message I want to put here is that there are many ways to do multi-site. All right? Some congregations are what are called networked or merged congregations, and those are where congregations basically come together and they share everything. They share mission, budgets, boards, staff, and programming. That's kind of the big kahuna, so to speak, the biggest, most challenging version of it. But there are other versions of multi-site, such as what we're calling satellite models. Can you see branches and campuses up there? So there's some congregations that are also creating other congregations in addition to themselves, staying networked with them, but they're extending themselves or extending their culture, sometimes to extend their reach, so they have 2 sites to be able to reach different geographies. Other times, most prominently in San Diego, they're creating another site, another multi-site, another site to reach new and more diverse populations. In their case, they created a satellite that was reaching a Hispanic population to diversify their congregation. So there's different reasons, there's different motives, not just different forms. The other form that often gets talked about is the branch model. And the branch model is congregations that are linking in permanent ways with smaller congregations out of the ability to share resources so they can be stronger together than they could be alone. And then the third model, the one I was with, was called a partnership or a yoked model. And that's where you still kept 2 independent congregations, where you didn't give up your, what I call the 3 precious B's: boards, budgets, and bylaws, right? A few of us are nervous as independent congregations giving those up or merging those, right? So in the yoked model, you don't have to give up your boards, budgets, or bylaws. What links you, the webbing between those congregations, is shared staffing. So in those models, it's really one large staff serving multiple congregations. I know that's quick, but does that give you a sense of the diversity of those congregations? So in every single case, they are all bound, and this is what's important to get, by permanent webbing. Permanent webbing that allows them to share resources and be more than any of them could be on their own. That's a piece of the basic logic, which means, and here's the piece that when you get into these multi-site thinkers' heads, right, they're a little bit infected, right? I won't make people raise hands who's involved in multi-site, but they're odd birds, right? They think differently than the rest of us. But one of the ways they think differently is they see their systems, not just as networks, but all as systems of efficiency. So one way to say, what is a multi-site congregational relationship? You need to answer it plainly as, it's a system of efficiency. And in every case, these congregations link together to identify redundancies between their congregations. Once they've identified those redundancies in their system, they consolidate those resources for the purpose of producing additional capacity through economies of scale. Now, how boring is that for a keynote? But here's my argument this morning, that this boring, bureaucratic kind of thinking might be our most inspirational hope in our movement, and maybe our best UUA growth and thriving plan. Okay? Because what I would argue is behind this kind of boring and bureaucratic way of thinking logically and identifying new resources, I'm going to argue is a whole new paradigm for where capacity and hope come from. That's what this is saying, that there's a new paradigm for where capacity and hope come from. And to get at that, we need to understand, again, now I'm ready to move into the multi-site mindset, the multi-site logic, to understand why this is a whole new paradigm for capacity and hope. We need to understand their logic. So now we're going to move into that.